Welcome to Building Children's Independence. Tonight we are going to be talking about the Montessori method, specifically in family child care. Very quickly, for those who don't know me, my name is Grace Eilers. I am the Family Child Care Content Specialist at Satellite Family Child Care System, which is an accreditation and support agency based out of Dane County. We now offer services free to family child care educators throughout the state of Wisconsin. And if you're interested in that, we will send a link to our website at the end of tonight's event. But enough about me. I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay Flory, who is our guest presenter and former Montessori guide.
Thank you, Grace. I am very excited to be here. This is my second event that I have done for this Montessori session. And so once again, I'm very excited. My name is Lindsay Flory. I have 4 years of experience as an infant and toddler Montessori guide. I did the whole certification and all of that. So yeah, I am really, really grateful to be here, and hopefully that I can embed some wisdom and some information for you all that'll be helpful.
We're excited to have you, Lindsay. We are going to start off talking about, when we're done with tonight's event, what are we hoping that you walk away? We're hoping that you have a better understanding of the guiding principles of the Montessori method, and we're going to be talking about those as it relates to the educator, which in the Montessori method, it's called the guide, so you'll hear us using that language too, the environment, and the materials, also known as the work. Also, by the end of tonight's event, you hopefully will have a much better understanding of the Montessori method's 5 key areas of study, which are practical life, sensorial, mathematics, language, and cultural studies. And the third objective, and arguably the most important, we are going to be talking about how this can be implemented in a family child care program. And before we go into the Montessori method specifically, we are going to make sure that we all have a shared understanding of what we mean when we use the term curriculum. So when we talk about curriculum, curriculum is what you do in your program. It is everything from the way that you structure your routines in your day. It is how you set up mealtime, how you approach children during free play, how much time you spend outdoors. It is the materials that you have in your environment. It is what you do in your program, and then ultimately what children are learning. And when we use the term curriculum philosophy, we are talking about the educational framework that guides the what you do in your program. So these are also referred to as approaches and methods, and they offer the set of values to consider for caring and when you're caring and teaching for young children. So this is the how of children's learning. For example, you see the little shoes on the slide here. In Western cultures, it is often accepted that children should begin learning to dress themselves very early in life. And so this is a philosophical belief about child development, and that it's not necessarily shared in other cultures around the world that may value, say, interdependence over independence. So today we are talking about the Montessori method, which is just one of the many, many approaches for caring for and teaching young children. Just want to make sure that we all have that shared understanding of what we mean when we talk about these two concepts. And now we will start with our opening activity. You will be put into small groups to discuss these two pieces. So think about how you currently plan what you do or what guides you in your mission of caring for and teaching young children. So again, this is going to ground you today in what you're bringing to this event, and you'll be able to better compare with the Montessori method for this new approach that you're coming to learn about today. So I would encourage you to introduce yourself to your fellow breakout room members. This is where your camera and your microphone will be most important. You're going to get out of this what you put into it. How often do you get to be in a room with others in your same profession, all talking about, how you currently approach caring and teaching for young children? Well, now that we have a grounding in what all the great experience and knowledge that you're bringing in today and how you're currently doing what you do, now we're going to talk about the Montessori method. So you may be thinking, I've heard of Montessori, but I'm not really sure what it is or how it's done. So we're going to hopefully answer those questions for you today by first placing it in history. So this method was developed in Italy by this extraordinary woman here on the screen. Her name is Dr. Maria Montessori. She was the first licensed female doctor in all of Italy. And when she was practicing medicine, she was asked to go and visit a psychiatric hospital. They didn't call that at the time. They called them asylums. Please come and help these unteachable children. And Maria noticed in her work at this psychiatric hospital that these children are not unteachable. They are just understimulated and very, very misunderstood. So it was her experience working with these children who were deemed as unteachable that she began to develop this approach that we are going to be talking about more today. And she saw incredible growth from these children who were, before she arrived, were deemed unteachable. And they just were not. They were needing a new method of learning and growing and developing. So she did that work, then began wondering how this would work for, say, the general population. And thus the first Casa dei Bambini, which means children's house of children, in Italian was opened in 1907. And you can see that depicted a photo from the first Casa dei Bambini on the screen. And it was originally open for children ages 2 to 6, roughly. So the Montessori method has since expanded to school-age children and infants and toddlers as well. So we will be also expanding that here today as well, because as family child care educators, you care for children of many different ages. And now I'll turn it over to Lindsay to talk about, we're going to be going over some of those guiding principles of the Montessori method. So I'll transition it over to Lindsay to talk about the first one.
Thank you, Grace. So yeah, our first guiding principle that we're going to be talking about this evening is respect for the child, which is a large portion of this practice and a large part of the foundation of the idea of Montessori. So acknowledging and honoring each child's individuality by noticing where their strengths and weaknesses lie and supporting their choices with safety in mind is something that is encompassed in respect for the child. So the adult in this situation provides the child with tools, with language and knowledge that they need to focus on their strengths with the child as the lead. So we're really focusing on child-led in a lot of this Montessori practice. Giving the child the opportunity to make their own choice and what they want to engage in and letting them participate in situations where they get to be independent shows the child that you trust their ability to make a good choice. So some ways that we can show this to children include talking to the child like the grown-up that you want them to become. So that means, we're not using the baby words, so to say. You're using, like correct anatomy of the body is one thing that is very common in Montessori. Yeah, just a grown-up like speak, like how you would talk to another adult. Giving them their ears. So you're really showing that active listening with the child and that they matter, from their words matter in the conversation that you're having with them. Offering them a role. So giving them that type of responsibility, demonstrating trust, and giving them space. So giving them space to explore, to kind of work through their own struggles and issues is showing that respect as well. And I'm going to send it over to Grace to talk about sensitive periods.
Thank you, Lindsay. So Dr. Maria Montessori, in her work with children, observed that children pass through these very, very specific stages in their development, and she termed those stages sensitive periods. So this is essentially Just so another way of explaining this would be a window of opportunity for learning. So when children are in these sensitive periods, you will notice they have intense focus. They will repeat skills or tasks often. They will be very committed to a task and mastering that task. And they will spend long periods of time just very concentrated on a specific task or a skill that they're trying to master. And it's important to recognize that these skills are much harder to master if these critical windows are missed because they all build upon one another. So here, if you're looking at this saying, what am I looking at? That's okay. These are just examples of those sensitive periods that Maria Montessori developed in her philosophy. And you can see here on the top, it goes from birth to age 6. Just as some examples, you can see from birth to age 1, movement, a lot of focus on movement very early in life and order, so that small objects would be the fine motor control. The order would be, in toddlerhood, would be the routine, the consistency, very, very important for our toddlers, as many of you already know. Just another few examples. Between the ages of 4 and 6, there's a lot of focus on pitch and rhythm, melody. Sensory impressions would mean understanding sensory experiences and being able to distinguish between the senses. So again, and oh, I'm sure you noticed too, language, the sensitive period for language is from birth to 6 and beyond. So those were just a few examples of them. And now we are going to watch a video that dives into this idea a little bit more and just shows some very great examples of this in action. And we are going to watch, this is a whole documentary on the Montessori method, which is free to watch. I will share it with you in a follow-up email after this event. And we're going to just watch 4 minutes of it together today.
Dr. Dr. Montessori talked about sensitive periods. And in the first years of life, these sensitive periods are more pronounced. There's a sensitive period to develop movement. There's a sensitive period to develop language, to develop fine motor, to develop social emotional skills to interact with other people. And this is natural to the child. He wants to do it. He can do it effortlessly when you offer the opportunity at the right time. I have found that the best way to have parents observe and point out to them, you know, what is really happening with the children, how joyful they are as they go about these tasks. For example, you know, you have a toddler washing dishes, and his experience of that is totally different, you know, than my experience of washing dishes. Because for me, it's like, oh, I just want to be done with it so I can move on to the next thing, right? For the toddler, it's just the sheer joy of being able and capable. You know, he's not washing dishes to have clean dishes. He's washing dishes because he can.
They're building their brain aggressively during this period. So they're developing movement, they're developing language skills. They're also, it gets a little more abstract, but they're also, in the earliest stages, developing a sense of self. Really, it's in these years that a child could be given the opportunity to start developing agency.
The type of growth that takes place in those first 3 years of life, and the speed at which it happens, and the volume of information that a human being can absorb those first 3 years, is just amazing, and it will not be repeated again. Never again in his or her life will a human being be able to learn so much in such a short period of time. And ironically enough, these are the years where we give the least amount of attention.
One of the biggest challenges that we face as a nation is that we have defined school from pre-K to 12th grade. We know from research that's been done that the majority of brain development happens well before pre-kindergarten even starts. And yet so many of our school concepts don't actually begin during that period of intense brain development. And so we need to redefine the age spectrum. We need to be thinking about children not from the time they hit kindergarten, but from the time they're born, right? And we need to start that investment earlier.
Our premise from the beginning is that all children, regardless of race, regardless of income, can succeed in school and in life when you start young and involve parents. We found that Montessori is the perfect tool for supporting that approach. And so the Montessori philosophy is an integral part of everything that we do.
That last part of the video, I think, really speaks to the importance of the work that you do. So if you don't hear that enough, hear it again and hear it many times tonight. I'm sure this will come up again, is what you are doing in supporting the child is you're helping create a foundation for the rest of their life. All right, Lindsay, I turn it over to you.
Great. Yeah, I love that video. I love when she just talks about the joy of that child washing dishes, because you forget that as an adult, that toddlers are just enjoying that. Such a good video. So we are going to talk about freedom and movement of choice. So freedom in the Montessori classroom can be viewed as 3 different levels. The first level of freedom is freedom of movement. So this is just simply to move and pursue learning activities with the whole body. The second is freedom to choose. So the child can choose any work that they would like to do in the environment, which they choose based on individual preferences and developmental needs. And lastly is the freedom to repeat. When a child is shown a new activity or work, as we call it, they are encouraged to repeat it until they have mastered the skill and that the activity has been designed to focus on. Allowing that child to have freedom within limitations, mainly safety and developmental appropriateness, helps the child to develop independence in their own way. Back to you, Grace.
All right. Another core principle to the Montessori method is this idea of intrinsic motivation. So intrinsic meaning motivation that comes from within. So Maria Montessori understood that children want to learn. Again, we saw this in that video that we just watched. The just sheer joy of being able to do something. Maria Montessori often talked about how children have an absorbent mind. They're just continually soaking up information from the environment. And therefore, in a Montessori program, children do not need external motivators. So this would be praise from adults or rewards for good behavior to learn. So very, very much the Montessori method emphasizes motivation from within by noticing and acknowledging for the child. So using phrases, if a child shows you their drawing, you may say, "You look so proud of your drawing," instead of, "I love your drawing." So do you see the difference there? One is acknowledging the internal motivation that comes from just doing something and accomplishing something. And the other is, although we are all called to do this and offer our praise, Maria Montessori really tries to hold this idea of fostering children's intrinsic internal motivation in doing.
Okay, and next we are going to talk about independence. So this is another Obviously, they're all very key, but independence tends to be one that we focus really heavily on in Montessori. So it emphasizes independence at the child's readiness, not at the adult's expectation. Independence is motivated by the child's natural natural drive to learn, like Grace said, in that intrinsic motivation. This drive has its natural ups and downs with distinct purposes over time. Again, kind of circling back to those sensitive periods. Montessori environments allow students to help adults with tasks, to dress themselves, to prepare their own food, and to move about the space as they see fit. Being able to do these things for themselves helps the children to develop a confidence, a sense of purpose and self-motivation, and achieve his or her individual learning potential. In Montessori, independence is an ongoing and organic process. So like it said, it has its natural ups and downs. Sometimes they're going to go through a phase where they need you more. They want, they want that extra help, that extra attention. But oftentimes, giving them that opportunity to be independent, you're going to see that children are capable of so many things, much more than we give them credit for. All right, right back to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what you said, Lindsay, and just highlight how much work on the part of the educator goes into supporting children's independence. When we were watching that video and the child was washing dishes, the toddler was scraping, that doesn't just happen overnight. There is so much work that goes into it on the part of the adults. And that's what we are going to be talking about next, is the role of you as the guide, is what the Montessori method calls the educators through this Montessori lens. And we'll start this section by thinking about this prompt. You have a child who dumps bins. I'm sure none of you have ever experienced this. Never seen this. Just kidding. How would you respond, or how do you respond? Because ultimately, if you work with infants and toddlers, you do see this often. Children dumping bins. So this will be another small group activity. So we'll send you away to your breakout rooms to chat. Again, the mic and your camera will be most important for this part. Connect with other professionals, hear how they approach this. There is not one right answer to this question. This is just to get us thinking about, in this moment, how would you currently show up? And then we're going to compare it to how a Montessori guide would approach this situation. So 7 minutes. I see the chat. I do it with toddlers all day. So this is very familiar to you. Fantastic. And thank you. I see Amy put the prompt in our chat. And Laura, if you could please open up our breakout rooms. See you back here in 7 minutes. All right. So now we are going to hear from Lindsay how, say, a Montessori guide would respond to this scenario.
So yeah, I love being in the breakout rooms. In the room I was in, there was a lot of really great information and suggestions there. So when you see that type of behavior, especially if it's consistent and it's really the only thing that the child is focused on, is a lot of the times that's a need that the child is wanting met. So it's usually that cause and effect, which was mentioned in a breakout room that I was in, that cause and effect of, if I do something, what's going to happen here? And especially if they're doing that and they're not interacting with the items that are in the bin that is being dumped out, if they're just doing that and they're walking away, or they're putting them back in and then dumping it out again, that's a clear sign there that they are wanting an activity or for dumping. So I had a lot of suggestions in the breakout rooms, which were amazing. Sensory bins are really easy. So using some sort of dried beans or rice and just a couple of cups to be able to transfer and pour and dump back and forth. You can put a spoon in there. Kids love that transferring material, and it's super, it's super affordable. You can go to the dollar store and get, some dried beans and a Rubbermaid container. Yeah, and then another thing that is mentioned is that sure, maybe they're dumping these things out and they're using the materials inside. It could be something that you might need to adjust the way that your items are stored. So maybe they need to be in something that they can see the material inside more effectively than in a bucket. So a lot of the times you can find them at the thrift store, you can find them at dollar store. They just have kind of flat trays. And if you have that obviously won't work if you have a ton of things like a bunch of blocks, but say there's 5, 10, 50, 10 items in a bin, you can have them displayed a little more visible for the child so that they can look at where it's stored and say, oh, I don't actually want anything in there. So then they're not dumping it out. But yeah, that a lot of the times it's that sensitive period again, that what you're getting if a child is doing a behavior consistently over and over again. So we're going to talk about the guide. And the guide is the word that we use in traditional Montessori as the teacher. And it's better understood as someone who establishes, maintains, and utilizes a prepared environment run on the child's time rather than the adult time. So again, that it's really child-led versus teacher-led experiences. They use their knowledge and expertise of the unique group of children to provide a substantial learning environment. The Montessori teacher often steps back while the students are working, allowing them to learn from their discoveries and draw on their own conclusions, which is sometimes very difficult. It was difficult for me right away when I was being certified in Montessori to not step in, to, see a child kind of struggling with a material or with work and to not step in right away to just fix it for them. Or again, with washing the dishes or preparing their snacks. So instead of me doing all of those things, I really took a step back and just wanted to be in the foreground of the scenario and let these children work in their own environments. So you're wanting to be on their level, showing that respect again. We're using descriptive language. And then again, that intrinsic motivation. So do you love your work? Or what's your plan? Instead of saying things like, be careful, or, don't do that, give them a thought-provoking question with the older children that can obviously communicate a little more. So your older toddlers, it's, what's your plan here? Or do you feel safe in that spot? What's your next step? Things like that. They're going to get the child thinking and trusting themselves. And Maria Montessori has a great quote that's very iconic that says, the greatest sign of success for a teacher is to be able to say, the children are now working as if I did not exist. And go ahead, Grace, take over.
We are going to watch, this is a video of a family child care educator fostering that independence and not doing it for the child. So I wonder what you will notice in this video.
Sit down, take your shoes off. Sam, you missed. Sit down, take your shoes off. Remember how I showed you this morning? Pull it up. There you go. Now you should be able to pick it up. Oh, so frustrating. I know. Let's try again. Let's try it one more time. Put your hand over here. Pull it off. See? You got it.
Oh, did you hear that? What else did you notice in that video?
How she assisted, but she still allowed him to do it on his own. And
Right.
find his own way to get it off.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yep. She showed him how, she did not do it for him. Exactly.
I think it's also important that to notice that she stepped in when there was that sign of frustration. So that's that fine line as a guide is once a child is frustrated and they're upset, that means that they're dysregulated and they're not going to be able to do the task at hand. So that is kind of a good sign to be like, okay, let me step in, try to calm the situation down again, and then just as she did, and then help and then assist and do that hand over hand. So that's a really common um, method in Montessori, especially with littles, with younger toddlers, is that hand over hand. So their hand is doing the action, but your hand is right over top helping them.
A really good point, Lindsay. And that's stepping in when you see a child is frustrated or clearly needs help from an adult, because they will need help from adults. You don't necessarily, how easy would it have been for her to just rip off the Velcro, pull off the shoe, throw it in the
Exactly.
closet, but then you wouldn't have gotten like at
No,
the
no.
end where he could do it himself and that look of sheer joy. This is what is so key to the Montessori method, is helping children build that independence alongside them in a respectful way. And I'm noticing, thank you all for your chat comments. I'm seeing a lot of, acknowledging feelings, seeing that motivation. She explained how to do it and not doing it for them. Very clear communication. She got on the child's level. And I know that video was pretty quiet too, but even if you couldn't hear her speaking, the actions were there. She didn't just do it for the child. Yep, building competence. Exactly. It's a very simple video, but it really it's a shift. It would have just been, and I know you are all going to have days, and you probably now have days where some days you're just going to rip off the shoe and throw it in the closet. Okay. And that's okay. That's okay. And we're just going to say that that happens. And I've been there too. But for the majority of the time, are you offering those experiences for children to do it themselves and get that intrinsic motivation that comes from simply doing something themselves? Yes, yes, I see. Yeah, building brain skills. Yes, all those neural connections that are happening when children are doing it. So, what Lindsay was saying about the hand over hand, children's bodies are doing it with your help when you put your hand over their hand and show them. Yes, so building relationships too. We have a very experienced and knowledgeable group with us here today. So you all know exactly what this educator was doing when she performed, when she showed up for that child in that way. Yep. Thank you for all the comments. I'm training my replacement. I always say I'm training my replacement. We are literally training the next generation of future adults. Yeah, you are caring for and teaching the next generation that are going to take care of this earth that we all inhabit. Exactly. All right, now we are going to talk about the prepared environment. So Lindsay came with a quote. I also have a quote from Montessori herself. She once said, "The teacher's task is not to talk, but to prepare and arrange a series of motives for cultural activity in a special environment made for the child." And it's a little bit of it's a long quote, but the pieces I like to take from it are: the teacher's task is not to talk, but to prepare a special environment made for the child. And we are going to dive into that, not before we talk and think about our own spaces and our own programs. So think about this question: what interest or play areas do you have in your program right now? And this is a very broad, just think about how your space is set up, how you organize your materials. This can include what you have out now, or maybe what you rotate in if you rotate toys a lot. So we are going to take 7 minutes for this breakout room, and this will be our last small group activity this evening. All right, now that we just thought about our own spaces and our own unique programs, indoor and outdoor environments, what have you, now we're going to talk about some key components of the Montessori prepared environment. And then we're going to talk about those 5 key areas of study that we hinted at earlier on tonight and end with a discussion of the materials, because that's a really big part of the Montessori method is the work within the prepared environment. All right, the first overall principle when speaking about the prepared environment for a Montessori program is that the environment is organized and neat. Now, I know it's not going to look like this when the kids are there. Okay, that's not what we're saying, but it's organized in a way, and we touched on this earlier, where children can find and replace materials on their own without help. They can see their options and feel confident with the independence strengthening task of cleaning up after themselves, putting things away where they belong. So that's a big part of the Montessori method as well. And it also emphasizes part of what goes under organized and neat is fewer materials in your space, but you rotate them often. So you will see, and we are going to look at more examples of Montessori shelves later on tonight when we talk about the materials, but you will see that the easiest to master materials and work trays are always placed on the lowest shelf, and then it gets harder and harder to master as you move up in shelves. All right, another very key component, the environment is made for the child. So your space is a world made for the child. It has child-sized furniture. This really helps freedom of movement and independence, which is something that the Montessori method strives to foster in children in these spaces. And I want to recognize this can be very, very challenging in a family child care home, which is ultimately, there must be this balance for you have your family and your family portion of your home, and then you have the program portion of your home. So you might not have a space you see in this photo. This program appears to be separated from the rest of the home, and that might not be what the space that you're working with looks like. Your program might be more integrated. So maybe think about this concept more along the lines of, do children feel welcome in this space? Do they have the option, freedom of movement? Is there child-sized furniture available for children? Are children able to easily access and use the space? So this is really the main component, and we just want to make sure we recognize that not every family child care program has a completely separate space that can be only made for the child. But just some examples of what this could look like. I see here in the photo, very universal among many child care programs, you will see child-sized furniture. So the child-sized couch, we have the child-sized table and chairs, and anything on the wall is at eye level for the child, even the clock. And most children in your program are not going to be able to read a clock, but it's that idea of this environment is welcoming to you, so you should be able to see what is on the walls. All right, this is another important quality of the prepared environment, and also very, very tricky for family child care programs that have mixed age groups. So age appropriate accessibility. This means that children should have freedom of choice and access to age appropriate materials. So you might have to get creative with how you store and display your materials. And you can see in this photo, the lower shelves is going to have materials that they might not be age appropriate for infants, but they are not hazardous to infants, if that makes sense. So anything that is within reach from an infant obviously cannot be a choking hazard. And then it looks like this person in their home have elevated up the art materials that, say, a preschooler could use. So these are just, you might have to get creative. Every program is so unique in family child care that it's very hard to really give the big picture of how this would apply to your program. So I just encourage you to think about, how do you currently do this, where you separate the access of materials to from the infants and toddlers to, say, preschoolers and school agers. So sometimes you might need to create a separate space for preschoolers and school age children, maybe to play with small objects or engage in age appropriate art, things like that. And I'm sure you all have so much you could share. So if you do have any tips for how to set up your environment to help increase accessibility for all ages, so children having access to age-appropriate materials, please share that in the chat so that your perspective and your experience can add to this event tonight. So please feel free to add the chat, but we will add in the chat and we will keep going. So you will also find, so here are the 5 key areas of study featured within this prepared environment. So within the Montessori environment, you will see each of these components reflected. Practical life, that includes activities that support independence and care for the self, care for the environment, and care for others. Sensorial, that's pretty much a catch-all to anything and everything sensory. So honestly, Lindsay, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like anything can be sensorial in nature. That's anything with colors, shapes, textures, smells, tastes, and sounds. Mathematics, and we're going to dive into each of these in more depth as it applies to the materials. So this is just a general overview of these right now, thinking about these spaces, how they show up within the environment. So mathematics, numbers, counting, quantifying, language, obviously speaking, the songs that you sing, the books that you read, having writing materials, letters on the wall, letter sounds. And cultural studies includes anything that helps children understand their place in the broader society. So this would be geography, botany, music, art, zoology. And here are some examples of different ways that the environment can incorporate those 5 key areas of study. So here on the top left-hand corner, we have practical life as reflected in, say, your pretend kitchen area. And this one seems to be, have running water, so that's pretty cool. A child could get a drink if they were thirsty. Again, incorporating those opportunities for children to help themselves in their space. This child has access to water. Sensorial, you can see on the bottom here, we have the sensory table, pretty obvious. Lots of sensory experiences going on. The sensory table, we have some water beads in there right now. And then on the right hand, the right photo, you can see lots of shapes, colors, textures, and language. Pretty simple. We have in the top right-hand corner, we have a art area and a bookshelf. So these are just some examples of how the 5 key areas can be incorporated throughout your space. And with that, now we are going to transition to talking about the materials. So I'll turn it over to Lindsay.
Thank you. Yeah, so now we're going to be talking about the work, which I was very taken aback when I was first introduced to Montessori and them calling toys or activities work. I thought it had, a negative connotation automatically. I was like, I don't like that. I don't want them to think that they're working the whole time. But the concept, the idea of this and what Maria Montessori really had intention with is that Montessori strives to erase those negative connotations that tend to come with the word work and replace it with what it should mean, which is to carry out a purposeful activity that fulfills an inner purpose and helps the person integrate their mind, body, and soul. So really it's just trying to establish that idea that anything that the child is doing is intentional, it's purposeful, and it has a meaning and a reason to it. And that eventually when they do have to work, hopefully they find something that is going to give them, a little bit of gratitude and joy in their mind, body, and soul. It's instilling that idea. All right, go ahead, Grace. So here we have some features of what the work looks like. Your standard kind of high quality Montessori work, which does tend to be quite expensive. So there are ways to do these activities and get them either secondhand or just incorporate them in a more recycled DIY type of way. We'll talk a little more about that, but mainly the work is hands-on. So that's pretty clear with any type of material. They are control of error. So control of error means that the materials are designed so that the child receives instant feedback about their progress as they move through the activity. So that's going to help them to recognize, correct, and learn from an error without adult assistance. So for an example on that screen there that you can see is that you can see that pink tower as the second icon on the screen. If a child tries to balance the little tiny block that goes on the top of the tower, let's say in the middle of the tower, everything on top is going to topple over. So there's that control of error. So they're going to be able to realize that, okay, this tiny block is not going to sustain the rest of the material. So I have to figure out a different way to do it. Also, other features are working on one skill at a time. That's that mastery. So we're working on, a less advanced skill, mastering it, and then moving on to a more advanced skill. So that's, gross or fine motor. You have to start with fine motor skills to be able to, use a utensil, things along that line. We also have auto instructional is another way of basically saying that the child is able to do the task without an adult's assistance. All right, Grace, go right ahead to the next one. Okay, so our practical life work and materials. So this includes, we've covered this a couple of times now, but just to reiterate, it includes exercises and activities that the child observes in a daily life. So this is going to help them with life skills. These activities develop children's independence, their concentration, and then their fine and gross motor skills. Typical practical life activities are involving transferring back and forth. So that's like spooning or using a fork. Utensils are a big one. Food preparation, cutting up their food, unwrapping a wrapper of a cheese stick or whatever snack that you're eating. Lessons in grace and courtesy, so using manners, kindness, empathy, and cleaning. Cleaning is also a really big one too. We also can do, this is care for the environment. So if you have plants in your environment, that's a great way to incorporate nature, but also giving it a responsibility and showing the child that, we have to care for other things as well, or recycling and throwing away trash. That was a big one that my kids loved doing, was throwing away their own trash. So in this slide here that you can see typical daily activities that are opportunities for practical life experiences. It's also important to acknowledge that a program that is implementing Montessori would engage in family style meals. So this means that the children are encouraged to set their place at the table, to pour their own milk, which I know sounds very daunting, especially with littles. That's going to be a mess. My advice, if that's something that you're trying to do, is put a tiny bit of liquid in that little pouring container that you're using. Start with small amounts of liquid. So if there is a mess, it's not very big. And then have them clean that mess up themselves. they are willing and able and, very competent to do so. But yeah, serving their own food and cleaning up after themselves. Okay, next slide, Grace. So here are some examples of activities that teach children to care for the environment, as I briefly touched on. As you can see, we have washing and drying the dishes, something that can be done with infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. You can see in the middle photo is a child pouring water into a vase to, oh, sorry, that photo is not there. So you can see, yeah, there's plants in there. Simply put, is that the other photo? Oh, sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing them.
Sorry, Lindsay. Yeah, I think
Oh, that's okay.
you were referring to the middle photo, right? With the child pouring
Yes,
water.
that middle photo. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Just wanted
Yep.
to, I'll go back to the one you were talking.
Thank you. Yep. So simply put, any activity that prompts the child to feel more important and the activities that they are doing are positively affecting their world that they explore daily. So that's a pretty easy way to kind of summarize all of that. Okay, so you can see there are, in these photos, there are some child size utensils. And see, everything is like, that eye level for the child. So they're able to, maybe for example, put that banana onto the tray there and they can use the utensils to slice up their own bananas. Those towers there that's in the second photo are very, very popular. I know, again, expensive, but if you do get access to one, there's something that kiddos love and they're able to then, if you don't have access to small child size items, you can use that tower throughout your spaces that you do have in your home and they can still be involved in them. Yeah, these are very beautifully laid out spaces with lots of materials that oftentimes are not fully accessible. So do what you can. It's really about getting creative. All right, now we're on to the next slide.
I want to just quickly pause and ask for everyone attending tonight, when we talk about practical life, as Lindsay's talking about this, think about your space. What materials, routines, or spaces that do you have in your program that reflect practical life? So this could be opportunities where the child could practice caring for themselves, caring for others, or caring for the environment. Feel free to share in the chat. Feel free to keep adding in the chat as we go along. We'll be asking more questions about these 5 key areas of study. So the next one is sensorial. Turn it over to you, Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you. So sensorial activities, which Grace touched on pretty well, that they can really be anything. There are lots of things that you can do that are considered sensorial, but they are there to refine the child's senses of sight, touch, sound, smell, and taste so that they can organize the sensory impressions or the things that they are experiencing in their own world and understand those better. So through sensorial materials, children learn about similarity and differences. They learn about dimensions. They learn about colors, shapes, textures, smells, and tastes and sound. So here are 2 examples of some sensorial shelves. You notice how the baskets allow for children to easily carry their work from one area to the other. So as I mentioned earlier about with the dumping of the basket, so having kind of shorter baskets or more narrow baskets or trays, one will make them easier for the child to carry opposed to just materials on the shelf that are not in a container, but also it gives them an easier way to visualize and see the materials there.
So we talked about practical life, sensorial. Now we're moving into mathematics. So this is exactly what you would think. This is anything to do with numbers, understanding differences between objects, counting, quantifying. A couple examples here in the photo. There's just one work tray. So this would be for, say, 3 and up, very, very small objects there, but being able to count and quantify the correct number and match it with the amount that is in the shell. So, and then on the right, you can see we have some blocks with that are different lengths and have the different amount of circles on them to depict that they are different in length. And just offering that to the child. It doesn't have to be a structured activity, having it out there, supporting them as they need help. Also, mathematics would incorporate, building materials, construction, your blocks, et cetera, et cetera. And here's just some other examples. Mathematics would include obviously writing numbers as well. But this begins really early in life with the songs that you sing and the books that you read that teach about counting and differences in size and quantifying objects. So you can see here on the right, there is a photo of a mathematics shelf. And if you remember, I did say that the easiest to master materials are on the lowest shelf, and then it gets harder as you go up. And we just really want to make sure, I want to make sure that we reiterate, if I haven't already said this, there are a lot of Montessori materials out there that are very expensive. They are typically high quality materials. You don't need to go out and buy a bunch of Montessori materials to be
Just gonna say,
implementing a Montessori method. You want to say more about that, Lindsay?
no, I was just gonna say, like, as if you didn't, I was gonna mention it, that you can DIY a good majority of things for Montessori. Like the picture there you see of those numbers, they are sandpaper numbers. You can also do the same thing with letters. You can use a note cardstock, and glue and a little bit of sand, and you just draw out the letter or the number that you're trying to depict and put some sand over it, let it dry, and that's exactly what those are. So the Montessori materials are amazing, but they are very expensive, and you don't have to have those things to do that. And I think a lot of the times it's intimidating when you see materials like this. So yeah, thank you
Right.
for mentioning that, Grace.
I know. I just thought because on the next slide too, we have a couple other of those classic Montessori materials, and I just wanted to make sure that we address that because obviously look at this very beautiful Montessori shelf here on the right, perfectly in place. No child has touched it for the day, and a lot of these things you don't need to go out and buy a bunch of expensive Montessori materials to begin implementing the approach, is what we're trying to say. Yeah. All right. Talked more about those materials that, again, a lot of these you can DIY, do it yourself. So the language area. Now we're on the fourth key area of study. The language area provides children with what you would expect, knowledge and skills to build their vocabulary, understand language, be able to discriminate between different sounds. And this is everything that you're doing throughout your day, speaking to children, having conversations, having those back and forth conversations with the infants and toddlers where you are expanding on what they are saying. It is all of the books that you have on your shelf. It is the alphabet chart that you may or may not have in your program, or anything that depicts letters and that children can interact with. So this is that language portion. And you probably have realized that many of these go together, as we've talked about. The sensorial key area of study can be really just can be incorporated into every area, but for the purposes of thinking about it in this way, that's why we're splitting them up in this way. So as we're talking about language, this will be an easy one, I know, for all of you. What materials, spaces, or routines do you do in your program right now that reflect this language? So what are you currently doing that provides these rich opportunities for language? Please share in the chat. This is great. So we're going to keep going. Please feel free to keep adding as you're thinking. And we are going to end with the last key area of study, which is cultural studies. So again, this helps children develop an understanding of their community, their world, and their place within it, their social responsibilities. So this again is a very, very broad key area of study. This incorporates geography. You'll see a lot of maps in Montessori programs or puzzle maps. I've seen that a lot. Botany, so different plants, different animals and their habitats, incorporates history as it's age appropriate, and music and art. So as you can see here, just a couple examples of how you can incorporate cultural studies in your program. So learning about different animals. And then here we have a music shelf. And again, music, language, and cultural studies. So a lot of these concepts go together.
And sensory.
And sensory, yes, and sensory, and sensorial, all of these go together. Yes, exactly. And I see here a couple of different examples of work trays. Again, Lindsay talked about this. You can find baskets and trays at thrift stores in very large quantities. So I would encourage you to go to your local thrift store if you are interested in arranging your environment, say, by organizing it with work trays. So we have a music one, a watercolor work tray. And we are going to end tonight by stressing the importance of nature in the Montessori method, because this is a big part of the Montessori method is children's connection to nature. Maria Montessori said that nature just enriches the life of each child. It supports their physical, social, emotional, and cognitive development. So nature is a big part, and everything that what we've been talking about thus far can be incorporated outside as well, or you can bring nature inside. And I know that this group knows that because many of you are talked about incorporating nature in your responses to our prompts that we gave to you today. Anything you want to add about that, Lindsay?
Yeah, really, you can really do pretty much anything outside. And even if you don't have, I know a lot of spaces or a lot of homes don't have a big yard or anything like that. Like you said, bringing things inside and bringing those plants inside, bringing the leaves, blades of grass, putting it in a sensory bin, little pebbles, stones, obviously that are accessible or that are developmentally appropriate based on the children. But if you do have a space outside, go do music outside. Go, get some chalk and draw outside. Little things like that, they're really going to make a difference. And they're also going to help with that regulation for those rambunctious kiddos. Like nature can do wonders for your more spirited children.
Yeah, take a nature walk. Bring a bag of dirt inside or just plop it outside. Let children feel that. It's a big part of the Montessori method, and we just wanted to end on that note. So with that, I see we are doing great on time. What questions or thoughts do you have?
Do you guys have any recommendations for where we can purchase like Montessori materials?
So I do. I don't know if they're I think they're pretty familiar with people, but if you know Poshmark at all, or the website Mercari it's MERCARI. Those are kind of like more high-end thrifting places online. I used to find like high quality Montessori materials from just parents who are trying to implement it at home, and your child grows out of it, because that's the thing with Montessori is once a child has mastered it, especially from within a home, as from a parent, if it's just one child, they don't need that material anymore. So they're trying to get rid of it, especially if they spent all this money on it. Facebook Marketplace is a huge one. As we said, the thrift stores, I know that it kind of takes time, and a lot of you providers don't have as much free time as you deserve. But I've been able to find some good wooden materials there at the thrift store as well. Those are my suggestions. Facebook Marketplace is a really good one as well.
Yeah, what a great question. If you are interested in browsing and potentially purchasing, Montessori methods, either thrifting it, used or new, I'll make sure to include that in the follow-up email, all of the places that Lindsay just said, and then maybe some other recommendations too. When I see Julio says at Weka conference they sell Montessori materials, so potentially at conferences too. And I see another question I'm going to throw your way, Lindsay. What are activities children can do instead of throwing wood chips?
Oh,
That was from Christina. Yeah, that was from Christina. And Jennifer responded and said, raking them? Question mark?
So with throwing wood chips, usually that is the fact that they just want to throw. So what I would recommend is having activities outside that they can throw. So having really like lightweight a ball or but usually you have to have a directed target then. So you don't want them just flying objects across your outdoor area. So I would have a directed activity, a directed target for throwing an object into a bucket, into add a target, things like that. If they are really set on throwing the specific wood chips, maybe use that for, also have a specific area they can throw them in. Like I said, a big bucket, yeah, but that's tough because you want to make sure safety is obviously at the forefront of everything. My suggestion would be just highly focusing on throwing activities that are safe. You could ball up papers. We used to do that too, or newspapers or tinfoil that has a little more durability to it, but it's not going to hurt somebody. Any type of those activities is what I would recommend.
I see a question. Will the certificate be available as well as the credit? That is a great question. A great segue into the evaluation that we will send out momentarily. Before we do that, I just want to thank Lindsay so much for coming and sharing her knowledge and experience on the Montessori method. And so thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you today for participating, providing your knowledge and experience too. So thank you.